former minister in the governance structure in Trinidad and Tobago, and of course, economist. We'll get to him as soon as you're ready, and of course, the upcoming budget. Yes, good morning and welcome, sir.
Good morning, good morning.
All right, we are hearing you. However, we'll have the speaker turn up in the studio and we'll get into it. But let's jump straight into it. You warned us about the dragon deal, and there are other manatee fields and all other type of animals that are in within the Trinidad and Tobago territory in relation to Venezuela. As a matter of fact, the OFAC license was revoked just before the elections, and now it's back in our hands. Walk us through what is required for that OFAC license to have meaning. Obviously, there's some bad blood between Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela. Very recently, the Prime Minister said that they stand in solidarity. Before that, she said she used word terms and name calling and so on. Let's speak to how this dragon deal in the first place, given that we do have the OFAC license, and correct what needs to be corrected with that OFAC license issue.
Well, first of all, I don't think we have a license. If I remember, the discussions with the Secretary of State indicated that he would prepare to support Trinidad and Tobago's application for a license, which means we don't have one. We have an agreement. Trinidad and Tobago signed an agreement in December 2023 with Venezuela for a 30-year exploration and production arrangement on subject to certain terms and conditions with Venezuela's state-owned company, PDVSA. All right, so there is an agreement between Trinidad and Tobago and PDVSA. Now, Venezuela is subject to sanctions. And sanctions, if you break sanctions, or a country is seen to break sanctions, or is known to break sanctions, and they're certainly not powerful as we are not powerful, then by definition, America can put pressure on us with regard to how we operate in the international sphere. And in those circumstances, what we have sought to do is seek an arrangement, a carve-out, an easement in America's sanctions against Venezuela by obtaining what is called an OFAC license. Right? But there is no OFAC license in place. Right? What the Americans have said is that they are prepared to agree to one, subject to the fact that Venezuela will obtain no benefit from that license. Now, it is Venezuela's gas. It is in Venezuela's waters. Unless Venezuela is willing to give it to us for free, then how could we not give Venezuela some benefit? So all those terms have to be negotiated, so that what is required is that you have to have some congruence between the OFAC license and the license that we have with Venezuela. And so far, that does not exist. And in those circumstances, it would be foolhardy for us to attempt to extract any gas from that field, because it means that we'll put all of our other business in jeopardy if America determines, take for example the position with India. All right. Mr. Trump has leveled countervailing tariffs, punitive tariffs, because as far as he's concerned, India should not be breaking international sanctions by trading oil with Venezuela. Now, there was an agreement. In fact, the previous regime under Biden had agreed with India that they could buy as much oil as they wanted from Russia. Well, along comes Trump and says, no, 50% tariffs, which knocks the stuffing out of any type of export out of India into the North American market. And then he raises H-1B, HB1 visas to $100,000 US a visa, which effectively is targeted against Indian engineers, Indian software engineers going to work in North America. Now, those are the penalties for being America's friend and not following America's instructions. And that's unfortunately the position in which Trinidad and Tobago finds itself. So in those circumstances, it needs an OFAC license Otherwise, we find ourselves in a situation where, well, we're not buying your oil, we're not buying your gas, we're not buying your ammonia, we're not buying your methanol, or alternatively, we introduce punitive sanctions on those exports to North America and any export of anything else. So that's the reason why you need to have an OFAC license.
All right. Given the present standoff, and one can interpret it as given the unpleasantries that were exchanged between Venezuela and Trinidad, you just said that there's where the gas is, and Venezuela is who we need to go to have this deal, if you want to call it, settled. How do
Yes.
we approach Venezuela now? There was the suggestion that given the former Prime Minister, Stuart Young, would have had the first interaction before him, Dr. Rowley, and these two should be used or accommodating or going along with the contingent to Venezuela to have the conversation. How do we approach Venezuela now if we have to really have natural gas from Venezuela, from the Dragon field? How do we negotiate, or are we back into accommodating that deal situation?
With some humility and some difficulty. I don't know that the presence of Dr. Rowley or Mr. Young will make a difference, or that is politically feasible. I mean, it's certainly in the interest of the country for that to happen. But the way the political actors have lined up, I don't see that as being on the cards. That's point one. Point two, I'm not clear that Kamla needs to have anybody to intercede on her behalf from the PNM for this to happen. You will recall that the conversation with Dragon preceded the accession of the PNM to office in 2015. There would have been a number of diplomatic maneuvers between the Kamla Prasad Bissessa regime between 2010 and 2015 with Venezuela. So Venezuela are not strangers to Mrs. Prasad Bissessa. They are not. Right? What has happened in the interim is that since her reassumption of office, she has taken some very hard positions in support of the US and US military action against suspected drug traffickers. Now, clearly that's a provocation by the US. The penalty for drug trafficking in North America is not death or summary execution. And we've had 4 incidents where alleged drug traffickers, who are alleged to be Venezuelans, have been destroyed in international waters. You could say executed. And in those circumstances, no government, whatever you want to think of them, will be happy to have its citizens dealt with in that particular fashion and not be able to retaliate, far less to have your next door neighbor endorse it. So that creates a very difficult diplomatic situation to have a conversation. And I don't know how that can be resolved. I don't know that you could basically carry somebody who spoke to me last I was friendly with, and they will open the door for me and everything will be all right. No, that's not going to work.
Mr. Browne, how soon can Trinidad and Tobago realistically see the benefits and the revenue earning from the Dragon Deal project? Are you in a position to give an outlook?
My outlook has always said, have a conversation with Venezuela, but don't expect to get gas anytime soon, given the current arrangements. The America and Venezuela are at the moment implacable foes. The only reason why any license have been given to US and given to US companies is that the configuration of North American refineries requires Venezuela gas. They were built with Venezuela gas in mind, and changing them out will make a complete mess of all the supply arrangements in North America. And in those circumstances, America has looked past its difficulty with Venezuela and is prepared to award licenses to the extent that is required to keep its refineries running. That friendship or that easement does not apply to Trinidad and Tobago. There's no strategic interest in allowing us to do that.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Browne, and I'm hoping that we're still with you. I'm seeing a little technical glitch there. Okay, we're hearing you loud and clear. So looking at, I want to shift to the budget, but before I shift to the national budget, which was announced, in terms of foreign investment and even encouraging the local industry to participate somehow, if this deal is in full flight, how would that shape look like?
I think we have to forget about Dragon, right? In the present, that is something that we could do down the road. We have 29 years left in the agreement, and somewhere in the course of the next 29 years, we'll either have to renew the agreement and then follow through, but not right now. That's not on the table. And I don't think that it will happen during the course of Ms. Prasad Bisessa's regime either. It can only happen as and when relationships between Venezuela and North America are normalized. And anytime you could get an idea when that will happen, that's about when we could do that, not before.
Okay. All right. We'll be going into the budget. Obviously, the deficit budget. We have been in a deficit for many years. I can't remember. You would be able to tell me. You've been in government, so you would be able to say exactly how many years. However, this budget, let me just go directly to revenue earning. Given that we have abandoned the property tax, when you're in a deficit, you're trying to come to a place where you can, have some financial freedom, so to speak. That is not within eyesight, if you want to use a local term. What do we need to do to bring or to get out of a deficit? Obviously, natural gas, our export in urea and ammonia and that sort of thing has diminished. What do we need to do to earn forex per se, or to earn from that standpoint? So let's go there. Revenue earning, as far as how we can get out of our deficit budget.
Well, let me use Tobago as an example. If Tobago wants to improve its GDP, it has to improve the income which accrues to Tobago. That means you have to sell more of anything. You have to have more hotel beds. You have to have more hotels. You have to have more activities. Anything else that can earn you revenue. And if you don't, then you will always be dependent on the percentage of the government budget that is spent on Tobago. So that, how do you solve that? Well, the only way you can do that is to maximize your revenue. And to maximize your revenue means to have more activities, more economic activities, which are driven towards the external market. The easiest idea is tourism. So until you start increasing the number of hotel beds, and you need to have somewhere around 6,000 hotel beds. Right? That's my calculation. That's my rough calculation. So you don't hold me on that. Right? You need to have about 6,000 hotel beds for Tobago to be in surplus. Right? And they have to be continuously filled. Right? So what you have to do to make that happen. Right? Now that's the exact position that Trinidad is in, except to apply that to everything. How much you have to export, how much more can you export? Right. The reality is that we're not producing any more gas, or not producing the type of gas we used to produce. So you can't look to the energy sector to pull us out of this. So you have to increase exports in almost every other sector. Now that's not going to happen overnight. That's going to take time. Trinidad produces and exports 1,700 different products. So there is diversification in our export function. The difficulty is we don't export enough of it. So what are the things that we have to do to allow that to happen? Now let's go back. That can happen today, and it will take some time to develop those capacities in the future. And that requires investment expenditure. We're not going to get any foreign direct investment for that type of investment, for those type of activities. Right? The energy sector was where most of our foreign direct investment came from. And we know what the result has been. Right? And in addition to which, if you have foreign direct investment, you have to pay dividends and you have to repay them their capital. And it takes some time to do that. So you're in a net operating position, depending upon how profitable those segments are, on how much percentage of that market segment stays in Trinidad and Tobago. Right? Those are the parameters. So the reality is, over the course of the next 5 years, you're not going to be able to make a significant dent in that. So that means you have to manage your expenditure. And managing your expenditure means dealing with the different sectional vested interests and getting them to agree to spend less and manage their lifestyles differently. Now, that's a communication exercise. That's an exercise in persuasion. That's also what the minister has called for in the Independence Day message. It calls for sacrifice. And Trinidad finds itself in a position which is parallel to the position in which we found ourselves in 1986. And if you think of the measures which were required in 1986, well, that's where the government is.
And just before, Mr. Khan, you bring 1986 into the mix, and measures were taken for revenue earning. VAT was one of the measures that was imposed, and today we hold on to VAT, and that was a revenue earner. It still is. We have abandoned property tax because we felt it was, well, for whatever reason, Mr. Mariano Browne, if you're running a village council, you collect your dues from your members to pay your light bill and so on. Let's bring that whole question of revenue earning back to that whole question. You tax the people to pay your bills, so to speak. And that had to do with the major revenue earner property tax. That is now abandoned. What do we do? Well, you mentioned sectors that can contribute to the GDP. However, how important is taxation?
All right, so let's get something very clear. Taxation is not revenue. It's revenue to the government, right? Taxation is an expenditure for me, the taxpayer. That depends on my ability to earn income. So what has to happen? You have to grow the economic pie if you want to increase taxation. That's the first point. That's why I phrased it in that direction, right? Because taxation is a tax on profits, right? So I have to have, the economy has to be more buoyant. It has to be more profitable, right? Otherwise, if you raise taxes, you're reducing my disposable income, right? Now that's the problem.
Mr. Browne, and what about, and I hope he's still with us, I'm seeing a freezing of his frame there. Okay, so what about the decline of, how to put it, the decline in GDP, which is being suggested by the central bank? How concerning is that? I think it's a 2% decline that the central bank is predicting. Is that something that we should be concerned about, or it's normal considering our last few fiscal budget presentations?
Of course it's normal. You will have to consider 2023 and 2022 aberrations. The long-term curve has been that the Trinidad and Tobago economy has been depressed. And this has been depressed because the most significant earner of revenue, if you want, the dynamo of the economy, has been the energy sector. And we've reached a plateau in the energy sector. And since we've been on a declining trend, that's the importance of all the cross-border fields. Cross-border meaning those fields which are shared between Venezuela and ourselves. And across the border fields, the fields which are in Venezuela waters, which we want to access. And for the moment, that is close to us. So that in the energy sector, the only thing that we can address is increase exploration, come to some agreement with regard to how we explore those shared fields in a way that can improve our production capacity. And the second part of that is that energy prices have been depressed. Remember, during the Passat Bissessa regime in the first incarnation, between 2010 to 2015, oil prices reached as high as $115. gas prices were generally high. So revenue went up. When the PNM left office in 2010, it left office with revenue of approximately 42 billion. That's what we were costing our future on. Revenue went up under the Prasad-Bissessar regime to 60 billion. And so did expenditure. And expenditure increased beyond the 60 billion now. In 2015, energy prices declined. And Trinidad was operating on a revenue perspective somewhere between 38 billion and 45. That's a huge gap.
But even to add to that, Mr. Browne, the debt is generally high as well.
Well, if you've been spending more than you're earning, you gotta borrow. That's why the debt is rising. And what the Standard and Poor report said, if your debt is going to continue rising, well, we will have to put you at sub-investment grade, because we don't think that you will be able to pay all that debt in the future, given the current configuration of the economy. Now that's the dilemma that government finds itself in. Everybody wants more. Nobody wants to pay more tax. Nobody wants to pay more for gas. Nobody wants to pay more for energy, the electricity or water. And so who is subsidizing it? Government.
All right. So let's go now to what people will anticipate or expect in this budget. There was a 10% offer to public servants during the election. You're laughing. Can the government afford to pay that 10% with this deficit budget? Obviously, this is Christmas is coming and people expect a back pay. And of course, how nice it would be. But in reality, is that possible given the economy and where we are?
So let me give you this scenario. All right. The argument has been that our foreign exchange reserves are declining. Demand is greater than the supply of foreign exchange, but we're keeping the foreign exchange mixed. I put a back pay a couple $1 billion in the system. What does that do? It increases demand. Anything that you buy in Trinidad and Tobago has a 70% import component. So if you just buy everything as normal, guess what happens? The demand for foreign exchange goes up. So I pay my back pay, I pay everything else, and my reserves decline. Problem one. Problem two, since I'm not generating revenue, and I decided I'm going to pay these things. Oh, by the way, the agreements are with respect of years ending up to 2021. That does not include the period 22, 23, 24. Right? That also increases the amount of back pay which will have to be paid because we're negotiating in arrears. Right? So what you're doing is putting pressure on government's expenditure. But they don't have the revenue to finance it. So what you're going to do? Borrow more? Okay, so there you go. You borrow more. And you put the money into the system. From a monetary perspective, you have just increased demand. And you've just increased the demand for foreign exchange. What's going to happen then? That's one. Two, given everything that has been said, and your revenue position is tight, it means that you're increasing the size of the deficit, which means that your debt to GDP ratio is rising, which means that your investment status is declining, which means that your ability to repay is also declining. What happens then? That's why it's a 1986 movement. Now, when Prasad-Bissessar came into office in 2010, I don't know if you remembered, but there was a promise to pay a pension to everyone who was over 60. Now, the cost of that, on my calculations at the ministry at the time, was approximately 7 billion, not including state employees. 7 billion extra. So that means if your expenditure was 43 and you had a budget of 42, well, you would have gone to $50 billion in expenditure with $42 billion in revenue for one item, nothing else. Well, when you talk about it going to a 10% increase, it's not as dramatic as paying everybody a pension at age 60, but it has the same effect. So there's some reality that is going on in the calculations at the moment at the Ministry of Finance in terms of what they could afford. Now, you have to balance that with the fact that you don't want, or the government so far has indicated they're not planning to increase any taxes. Well, all you're doing is increasing the size of the deficit, and you're creating a problem that you have to solve. You have to solve it in terms of, do I increase taxes? How do I adjust my foreign exchange situation? And finally, how do I grow the economy? So those are not easily reconcilable options. And if you want, you could ask Mr. Varnas, Dr. Varnas James, to if Mariano is speaking the truth.
All right. But lastly on that, okay. So you mentioned borrowing, and there is the IMF looking and advising, waiting for us to embrace the IMF. Would that be recommendable? And what would that mean for Trinidad and Tobago, given their presence here and their advice? Of course, the Moody's rating would give them even more impetus to want to hold on to what they can earn here in Trinidad and Tobago. And what would that mean, sir?
Well, the point I want to make to you, the IMF is not looking anywhere. Right? We signed an agreement with the IMF where we are part of an international system. It is the IMF's responsibility to look at stability across the international system, country by country. Right? We have agreed to that. That means that we have to manage our affairs. That has nothing to do with the IMF. Right? If we aren't managing our affairs properly and we aren't making decisions we ought to make, and we go by the IMF, what do you expect them to tell us? These are the things that you should have done, you didn't do. You have to do it. I can't do it.
So they can't just intervene. Just to be clear, the IMF can't just intervene, right? Because there's a misconception with how the IMF functions, Mr. Browne.
No, you go to a bank and you want to borrow money, right? You have to tell them how you're going to repay it, correct? Right? So you have to tell them what you are going to do. Well, the IMF is in the position of that bank, right? I am lending you money. You have to repay me. What are you going to do? It's not my fault. It's your fault. You need my money. Therefore, what are you going to do? Not me. If you want help.
Just to be clear again, Mr. Browne, the partnership or the arrangement between Trinidad and Tobago and the IMF is one of I need to just clarify exactly how it would function in the event that, God forbid, things are not promising.
Well, they aren't promising. And the IMF has been every 2 years, the IMF does an Article 4 consultation and it gives a report. The report is there for everybody to see, right? They've been talking about our foreign exchange position. They've been talking about the unsustainability of our deficit position, about the need to do X, we need to borrow less. We have made certain commitments which we have never lived up to.
Okay,
right?
And let me just ask quickly. Mr. Browne, because I know we press for time, but in terms of the late announcement, was it a late announcement of the national budget? Because if you consider and I know you recently said that you don't anticipate any government shutdown, but when you consider the ending of the fiscal year being the 30th of September, if I stand to be corrected, and then the beginning of the new fiscal year, which have gone October the 1st, when you consider the presentation and then the debate and everything, are we behind time? How does it work in terms of making sure that there's no
Things are tight.
shutdown.
Things are tight, right? But our system is different than the American system. A government here is a majority government. Therefore, it has a built-in majority. It can force anything through, right? That's one. Secondly, the Senate has no vote on a money bill. So all the action is taking place in the lower house. And if it is agreed there, then by definition, the upper house just falls into position. So the time is tight, but it's possible.
All right. And lastly, there was this, I'm not sure it was the IMF who advised, or there was a talk of devaluating the TT dollar. Economists like yourself advised against it, or you were the one that in support of a devaluation. And what could that mean? Should we devalue the TT dollar? What will that mean? There are those who say hardship again, 1986 all over again. Bring perspective into the devaluation.
The TT dollar has been devalued this year by 10% already without doing anything. It's tied to the US dollar. And whatever happens to the US dollar happens to the Trinidad and Tobago dollar, right? So if you were to look at what we call cross-currency exchange rate, the price, how much we have to spend in TT dollars to buy sterling, to buy yen, to buy euros, we're now paying 10% more. So we have already had an effective devaluation of the dollar. And the word is not devaluation, depreciation.
Right.
Those things happen all the time. Now, the economics is very clear. If you aren't earning more foreign exchange, or your trade balance is worsening, then your foreign exchange price will worsen. We've been in that position since 2014. And we allowed the dollar to depreciate from 640 to 680, and all of a sudden we said we're not going any further. Well, reality has been going on. And there's been depreciation taking place whether we like it or not. And it's reflected in the unofficial price for the US dollar on your market. So if you want to leave that situation in position, the demand for US dollars of 680 is going to rise. But at the same token, the amount of transactions which are taking place at 850 is going to rise too. The IMF said very clearly in 2021 that the trade weighted terms, we were already in a situation where the dollar was depreciating. So we have an artificial exchange rate. That's it.
All right. As we get ready to close, what do you anticipate? Just an overview as to what we expect on the 13th, and I think it's confirmed, Monday, budget day. Just an overview, what we can expect or what not to expect. Is there going to be increase in prices for basic food items? Just your perspective as to, an overview as to what we anticipate this budget will be.
Basic food prices, in large measure, are determined by prices in the international market, because we're importing more than 90% of what we eat. So that has nothing to do with the budget, except, of course, the government decides to increase import duties. Then that increases the prices for everybody. So it's not in government's interest to increase import duties. It has to address its expenditure and its revenue. To increase your revenue, you have to increase tax. To decrease your revenue, you have to cut expenses. Now, nobody likes either of those two situations. So that is the difficulty that Mr. Tanku is walking through. And he has to do a combination of both. So there are lots of things that could happen. But if he increases indirect taxes, he immediately affects the inflation rate.
All right. Mr. Browne, we're indeed pleasure. Always, we're in school and we are thankful for your education on the budget and, of course, how we get by. We want to thank you very much and all the best to you. We'll chat again.
Thank you very much for having me.
Excellent.